Testing. Ja. Nå kommer i hvert fall lyden fra
Welcome to this day of celebration. 50 years of Nordic cooperation within forestry. This is a really special day. I've been looking so much forward to this because there are not many corporations that can celebrate 50 years. My name is Liselotte Steffensen and I am the director of NordGen. The topics that NordGen Forest work with is really important. Right now, we work very much with climate change, and predictions for climate change, and what does that mean for the future forests. But this is also today where we look back on the 50 years. It's important to look back, to understand what we have done, what we have learned, to be able to move forward. The topics that NordGen Forest work with is really important for future forests. That's also why we today look back on the 50 years. What have we learned? What have we done? Because that's a really good platform for moving forward. Right now, we focus very much on forest genetics and the climate change. So I send a very warm thank you and greetings to all of you national representatives that are helping us arranging the NordGen Forest conferences, thematic days, and all the work that is behind NordGen Forest. We are at very special times right now. That's also why I am standing here in the forest in Alnarp at the Swedish Agricultural University campus site. And it feels great to be here in the forest. And I'd like to welcome you all to an hour of celebration. And I will leave now the word to Terje, who will lead you through this day.
Thank you, Lise Lykke. I will
Welcome to this day of celebration. 50 years of Nordic cooperation within forestry. This is a really special day. I've been looking so much forward to this because there are not many corporations that can celebrate 50 years. My name is Lise Lykke Steffensen, and I am the director of NordGen. The topics that NordGen Forest work with is really important. Right now, we work very much with climate change. Welcome to this day of celebration. 50 years of Nordic cooperation within forestry. This is a really special day. I've been looking so much forward to this because there are not many corporations that can celebrate 50 years. My name is Lise Steffensen and I am the director of NordGen. The topics that NordGen Forest work with is really important. Right now, we work very much with climate change and predictions for climate change and what does that mean for the future forests. But this is also today where we look back on the 50 years. It's important to look back, to understand what we have done, what we have learned, to be able to move forward. The topics that NordGen Forest work with is really important for future forests. That's also why we today look back on the 50 years. What have we learned? What have we done? Because that's a really good platform for moving forward. Right now, we focus very much on forest genetics and the climate change. So I send a very warm thank you and greetings to all of you national representatives that are helping us arranging the NordGen Forest conferences, thematic days, and all the work that is behind NordGen Forest. We are at very special times right now. That's also why I am standing here in the forest in Alnarp at the Swedish Agricultural University campus site. And it feels great to be here in the forest. And I'd like to welcome you all to an hour of celebration. And I will leave now the word to Terje Hoel, who will lead you through this day.
Thank you, Lise Lykke. I will take over from here. With us today we have already heard Lise Lykke from Alnarp. On my left hand I have Kjersti Bakkebø Fjelstad, who is the section leader at NordGen. And to my far left I have Tore Skleppa. He is an active pensioner and a living historian in forest history. I am Terje Hoel, the Norwegian representative in NordGen Skog. I'm working in the Ministry of Agriculture and Food, and since Norway is chairing NordGen Skog at the moment, I'm going to also share this session.
Yes, and here at the scene, as Terje mentioned, we are only 3 people today due to the need for distancing, as you know. We should have been in Elverum at this time. We should have had 3 days of a conference, but unfortunately we were not able to. This year we will come strongly back next year, I promise you. These surroundings that we are in now are not randomly chosen, I must say. We are in Ås and we are in a genetic trial of Nibio, Norwegian Nibio. And this genetic trial was headed by Tore at the time, almost 50 years ago. So this is a perfect scene for this digital greeting to you all.
In the next hour we will give you some insight into the history of NordGen and also current activities. We will also take in colleagues and partners from the other Nordic countries.
And for those of you who have not already joined the Zoom event, you can find it by clicking the button where it says Join Zoom on the upper right of your screen. And then you will find the chat in there.
And now I will give the floor to Olaug Vervik Bollestad, the Minister of Agriculture and Food in Norway.
Dear all, I'm sorry we cannot meet at the conference in Elverum, but I'm very happy to join this celebration of the 50 years anniversary. I want to say happy birthday to everybody and give you all a happy birthday hug. NordGen Forest is a network and a meeting point, so the hug includes everybody in this cooperation. I think that NordGen shows how good cooperation should be. NordGen has good communication between science and professionals and between people with different roles. You also include students in the dialogue. That is important, I think. NordGen Forest and what used to be Nordisk Skogbruks frø- og planteråd has done this for 50 years. This is one reason for becoming such an important institution for this sector. NordGen conferences and seminars are very popular. Exchange and sharing of competences is how we go further. Today, the Nordic countries have trees, especially spruce and pine, that grow faster and have better quality than 50 years ago. Despite the differences between our countries, the tree breeding programs are at similar level and they are world leading. I think that we have much to thank NordGen Forest for. One of the benefits of this cooperation is good relations between actors. Even if we have competition, there is free flow of genetics material between our countries. Nordic colleagues agreed about the principle in the Kalmar Declaration from 2003. Tree breeding was historically introduced by the business to make the timber grow faster and with better quality. Today, we also consider tree breeding and planting an action to reduce climate change by capturing more carbon. Climate change is also a challenge to the forest itself, which needs our attention. We need to focus on conserving genetics variation in all trees. Breeding can be used to assist some species to adapt to a changing climate. I have focused on these matters in our forest policy, and NordGen Forest has helped us to bring our competences to a higher level. And other
Welcome to this day of celebration. 50 years of Nordic cooperation within forestry. This is a really special day. I've been looking so much forward to this because there are not many corporations that can celebrate 50 years. My name is Lise Løkke Steffensen and I am the director of NordGen. The topics that NordGen Forest work with is really important. Right now, we work very much with climate change and predictions for climate change and what does that mean for the future forests. But this is also today where we look back on the 50 years. It's important to look back, to understand what we have done, what we have learned, to be able to move forward. The topics that NordGen Forest work with is really important for future forests. That's also why we today look back on the 50 years. What have we learned? What have we done? Because that's a really good platform for moving forward. Right now, we focus very much on forest genetics and the climate change. So I send a very warm thank you and greetings to all of you national representatives that are helping us arranging the NordGen Forest conferences, thematic days, and all the work that is behind NordGen Forest. We are at very special times right now. That's also why I am standing here in the forest in Alnarp at the Swedish Agricultural University campus site. And it feels great to be here in the forest. And I'd like to welcome you all to an hour of celebration. And I will leave now the word to Terje Hoel, who will lead you through this day.
Thank you, Lise Løkke. I will take over from here. With us today we have already heard Lise Løkke from Alnarp. On my left hand I have Kjersti Bakkebø Fjelstad, who is the section leader at NordGen. And to my far left I have Tore Skreppa. He is an active pensioner and a living historian in forest history. I am Terje Hoel, the Norwegian representative in NordGen Skog. I'm working in the Ministry of Agriculture and Food. And since Norway is chairing NordGen Skog at the moment, I'm going to also share this session.
Yes, and here at the scene, as Terje mentioned, we are only 3 people today due to the need for distancing, as you know. We should have been in Elverum at this time. We should have had 3 days of a conference, but unfortunately we were not able to. This year we will come strongly back next year, I promise you. These surroundings that we are in now are not randomly chosen, I must say. We are in Ås and we are in a genetic trial of Nibio, Norwegian Nibio. And this genetic trial was headed by Tore at the time, almost 50 years ago. So this is a perfect scene for this digital greeting to you all.
In the next hour, we will give you some insight into the history of NordGen and also current activities. We will also take in colleagues and partners from the other Nordic countries.
And for those of you who have not already joined the Zoom event, you can find it by clicking the bottom where it says Join Zoom on the upper right of your screen. And then you will find the chat in there.
And now I will give the floor to Olaug Vervik Bollestad, the Minister of Agriculture and Food in Norway.
Dear all, I'm sorry we cannot meet at the conference in Elverum, but I'm very happy to join this celebration of the 50 years anniversary. I want to say happy birthday to everybody and give you all a happy birthday hug. NordGen Forest is a network and a meeting point, so the hug includes everybody in this cooperation. I think that NordGen shows how good cooperation should be. NordGen has good communication between science and professionals and between people with different roles. You also include students in the dialogue. That is important, I think. NordGen Forest and what used to be Nordisk Skogbruks frø- og planteråd has done this for 50 years. This is one reason for becoming such an important institution for this sector. NordGen conferences and seminars are very popular. Exchange and sharing of competences is how we go further. Today, the Nordic countries have trees, especially spruce and pine, that grow faster and have better quality than 50 years ago. Despite the differences between our countries, the tree breeding programs are at similar level and they are world leading. I think that we have much to thank NordGen Forest for. One of the benefits of this cooperation is good relations between actors. Even if we have competition, there is free flow of genetics material between our countries. Nordic colleagues agreed about the principle in the Kalmar Declaration from 2003. Tree breeding was historically introduced by the business to make the timber grow faster and with better quality. Today, we also consider tree breeding and planting an action to reduce climate change by capturing more carbon. Climate change is also a challenge to the forest itself, which needs our attention. We need to focus on conserving genetics variation in all trees. Breeding can be used to assist some species to adapt to a changing climate. I have focused on these matters in our forest policy, and NordGen Forest has helped us to bring our competences to a higher level. Another important matter is the risk of invasive species that are harmful to our forests. Global trade is increasing to import of these species. We don't want species or genes to disappear, so we need to better target these concerns in the future. I would like to see a forest sector focusing on the forest as a whole. NordGen Forest, you have an important task in breeding different aspects of genetics resources and to use of forest trees. I wish you all the best for the next 50 years. So once again, congratulations to all of you.
I would like to thank the Minister for these comforting words. I would like to highlight how she is pointing at how commercial forestry has been important also for the conservation of genetic resources. It fits very well to introduce Tore Skrøppa, who knows everything about these linkages.
Thank you, Terje. In this short presentation, I will tell about the establishment and give some glimpses from the history of NSFP, Nordisk Skogbruksfrø- og Planteråd, or in English, the Nordic Council for Forest Reproductive Materials. This story really started in 1966 at the bar in Paris. A Swede, a Dane and a Norwegian, they were representatives and delegates at the OECD Forest Reproductive Scheme, and they were sitting and discussing in the evening and agreed that we really needed a Nordic cooperation in this area. They went home, they discussed among the Nordic forestry institutions for 4 years, and finally in 1970 the Nordic Council for Forest Reproductive Materials, NSFP, was established in 1970. The first meeting in October 1970 in Helsinki, 2 persons from each of the countries, Norway, Finland, Sweden and Denmark. Later, Iceland joined also the council, and the council should have a secretariat in each Nordic countries for a 5-year period, 2 persons from each country, and they should meet twice every year. The initial mandate of this council was to cover the whole forest regeneration cycle, which included genetics and tree breeding, seed procurement, seedling production and regeneration methods. This should be done with efforts to initiate, to develop and follow the Nordic cooperation in these areas, to follow research and initiate new research activities, also to collect and distribute information among the countries, to contribute to education, conferences and excursions, in particular conferences on important subjects. And the Council should contribute to common Nordic views in international questions. There are several milestones I will mention during the period of NSFP. First, in 1986, NSFP became officially part of the Nordic cooperation in agriculture and forestry under the Nordic Council of Ministers. Forest genetic resources were not so important and weren't mentioned so much in the 1970s and early 1980s. When in 1996, conservation of forest genetic resources were specified for the first time in the statutes and NSFP. There were discussions in the 1990s and early 2000 about cooperation among the Nordic countries on forest genetic resources, but nothing happened until in 2003. Then NSFP appointed and established the Nordic Network for Forest Genetic Resources. This network should have a chair, which was a member of NSFP, and 1 person from each country should be represented, and they should have important roles in the conservation activities in each country, and also towards EUFORGEN, the European cooperative efforts in forest genetic resources. This Nordic network resources should collect and should distribute information of national activities among the other Nordic participants. This Nordic network should also influence that considerations were taken about conservation of genetic resources both in the practical forestry and in the forest policies from the ministries. And also the network should coordinate the EUFORGEN activities so that Nordic voices were heard in Euphorgen, the European cooperation. There were discussions in the Nordic Council of Ministers about better cooperation among the Nordic countries in genetic resources in agriculture, where plants for agriculture, animals, and in forestry. Also, they wanted to include fisheries in this discussion. The Nordic Council of Ministers, they developed a strategy for the conservation of genetic resources in agriculture and forestry, and they decided they should establish a new organization, NordGen, integrating agricultural plants, farm animals and forest trees into one organization. I would say that Norway played quite a big role in this organization of NordGen, and in particular Per Harald Grue in the Ministry of Agriculture was very important in this work. NordGen Forest now became part of this organization, being responsible for forestry activities, and it has two units: Forest Regeneration Council, which was a continuation of NSFP, and the Working Group for Forest Genetic Resources, which was the continuation of the network under NordGen.
Thank you, Tore. We will come back to some of your points from this presentation later. I will then give the floor to Finland.
NordGen, happy anniversary. Greetings from Finland. For us who work with the forest reproductive material, you provide a great platform to meet and discuss in a nice atmosphere. We, as Nordic countries, share the passion for forests and partly the same tree species. Together we learn from each other, despite the small differences in our systems. After a NordGen meeting, one always feels good. We are looking forward to seeing you soon again.
Thank you, Finland. We have asked a few of our partners to give us some insight in our cooperation. I'm happy to introduce Mats Berlin from Skogforsk Sweden to give us some information about the value of knowledge and the exchange of data. If you have any questions, please write them in the chat and we will also reply in written form.
So this very short presentation will be about looking at climate adapted deployment recommendations for Scots pine and Norway spruce, which is a joint approach for the entire Nordic and Baltic region. And the background for this project is that when you have these forest reproductive materials of Scots pine and Norway spruce, they are largely genetically improved in this region. And the forest reproductive material is often seed orchards. And these seed orchards are adapted to different combinations of temperature and light. That means that climate change affects the performance and the deployment zones of these seed orchard crops. So by taking climate change into account, in that sense, we're using climate variables that are tailored for these species and regions, and also using scenario data. We can include this information and develop new models that show the effects of transfer of these seed orchard crops. And then we want to implement them into new and modern web tools. So we are then working from separate national to regional joint models and deployment platforms. And this work is currently going on in the EU project Forest. For Scots pine, we've already done quite a lot. In this case, the first collaboration part was between Sweden and Finland, and we have used some almost 400 field trials and almost 300 genetic entries, that is check lots and provenances, in both of these countries. So we have used this data to develop models for heightened survival. And we have also implemented this into a joint Swedish-Finnish web tool, which was released last year and is operational. However, we now want to change the climate reference data because we only needed Sweden and Finland in the first part, but now we are changing the reference data to the entire Western Europe region. And we're also trying to include more data, more field trials. As you can see, we're also in this case using Norwegian data in order to be able to include Norway in such a model. And then, of course, these models for heightened survival have to be updated with the aim of providing a joint Nordic-Baltic web tool that's the aim. So that's for Scots pine. For Norway spruce, the aim is very similar, but we haven't come quite that far yet. For Norway spruce, we have collected a similar amount of field trials, but this case Sweden, Finland, Norway, and the Baltic states. And as you can see, the genetic entries or provenances that we have tested are from the entire Western European region. So it's a bit bigger amount of genetic background of that material. So we are currently developing these models for heightened survival, considering all of these countries at the same time. So it's across country borders, these models. And what we have found so far is that temperature and precipitation are key drivers for this performance of Norway spruce. But we are also looking specifically into growth rhythm, as Norway spruce is a secondary tree species. So we want to specifically study growth rhythm and the risk of having especially late spring frosts. And I would like to show you now how far we have come in using a beta version of this web tool. And I will show you right now. Let's see. Oh. So in this case, you can see that the tool is looking very similarly to the tool that we have right now. You have Google Maps, and you can click on different positions, in this case in Sweden, and you can click in Finland. And you will get the recommendations when you click at the show recommendations part. In this case, we can just show that it works. So you get the recommendation of the usable seed orchards that perform best for this specific site. So if we just go back, we can have a look what happens now if we go into Norway, for example, between Oslo and Lillehammer, and we just click here. And you see that it's possible to click here to select the site. And when you get show recommendations, you actually get this kind of recommendations of the seed orchards also in Norway. And if you look at the maps for a specific seed orchard, in this case, the best one, you can see that now the maps are adapted to take not only Norway, but also the Baltic states into account. Now, bear in mind that this is a beta version, and we have to apply some administrative rules to this recommendations. But this shows that the new climate reference data and the web tool is on its way, and we are continuing work to get this operational within, I would say, a couple of years, hopefully. So that's the greeting from Sweden.
Thank you very much, Mats. This is very impressive work and very valuable work. Just a question, could you say something about the background of this? I mean, on the basis of Nordic cooperation and the flow of information in this sense?
I would say that it was started some 10 years ago within another EU project, the specific part that I'm working in. I mean, the Nordic cooperation has been going on longer than that, but this specific project has started a decade ago, I would say, and within another EU project. And then we have kind of with our great connections between the collaborative connections between the breeders in this region, we have shared data which we could have. I mean, it's not so easy to share data if you don't. You have to have some kind of trust and some kind of idea of what you want to aim for. But I would say that it has been no problem to get all of this very valuable data from all the countries and working with it together. So it's been going on for a decade, I would say, now.
Tore, your presentation earlier was really interesting. I would have loved to be in that bar in Paris. But Mats just told us about one example of this, the value of the cooperation. What about other things, the other achievements? Could you say some more about that?
Yes, I would say that the activities of NSFP could be divided into two parts. First, at the bureaucratic level. And the first part, they started with what certification of forestry productive material. This means what was the origin of the materials and where should they be used. They had in particular problems defining where to plant material from seed orchards. And today we have much better techniques for finding that, as Mats just told us. A second important point at the bureaucratic level was that the ministers of agriculture in the Nordic countries really utilized NSFP during the negotiations with EU in 1992 and 1994. And later on, Norway and Iceland utilized NSFP to get the information about policies of forestry in the EU countries. A third point, I would say, was about clonal forestry. What kind of regulations do we need for clonal forestry? A working group was established on that topic, and we had a couple of seminars discussing this.
But what about the practical level? I mean, my understanding is that the core of this cooperation has actually been more on technical issues. So do you have any examples of that?
Yes, there was a lot of practical activities. One important part of the work was to have conferences, and in particular conferences from people working in the nurseries. And I think later on we will hear more about these conferences. There was initially also a lot of discussion and techniques involved how to collect cones from standing trees in the forest, and a lot of discussions and even meetings was about this. But we did not train monkeys to do cone collections, as we did in a project I participated in California a long time ago. And also seedling production was very important to discuss, because earlier we had 4-year-old seedlings transplanted in large fields, and now we went over to shorter time production of seedlings in containers. What type of containers should we use? What type of cultivation methods? And there were a lot of discussions about this at the Nordic level. Also exchange of statistics about the number of seedlings produced and leftovers of seedlings, so that could be used in other countries and in other nurseries. These were important activities in this. And also, if we go to this genetic resources network, there were activities that should be mentioned. And each year, information from each country was collected and was distributed to the other countries' participants, which was very important really, and in particular for coordination activities relative to Eufogene at the European level.
Yeah, and Eufogene is this European cooperation,
Eufogene is the European cooperation on forest genetic resources, where I think the Scandinavian or Nordic countries have played an important role in this. There were discussion topics on the meetings each of those 5 years that this network existed under NSFP about in situ and ex situ conservation. And also we initiated activities on legal rights to forest genetic resources, which continued into NordGen Forest.
Thank you, Tore. And then we will have a greeting from Denmark.
Kære NordGen og kære nordiske skovfolk, tillykke med jubilæet. Vi sætter stor pris på NordGen og det nordiske samarbejde. Det er et samarbejde, hvor mødet mellem mennesker og idéer giver baggrund for videndeling og udvikling, da det altid foregår i et åbent forum. Her fra Danmark kan vi nok ikke imponere jer med vores skovareal eller vores vedmasseproduktion. Det er kun juletræer, vi for alvor producerer flere af, end vi selv kan bruge. Her rækker vi til gengæld langt ud over landets grænser, både i Norden og resten af Europa. Men skovene har alligevel en stor betydning i Danmark. Derfor har vi en ambitiøs plan for skovene. I løbet af dette århundrede vil vi fordoble skovarealet. Her er et egnet frø- og plantemateriale vigtigt. Og det er vigtigt at have fokus på den tilknyttede teknik og produktion, helt fra frøindsamling over planteproduktion til kulturetablering. Alt det bidrager NordGen til at udvikle og formidle. Ingen ved, hvad fremtiden bringer, men herfra tror vi på, at NordGen også i fremtiden vil give et inspirerende og aktuelt bidrag til skovbruget. Med venlig hilsen, Torben Leisgaard, Frisenborg Planteskole og Gunnar Friis Prosjovsky, Naturstyrelsen.
Thank you, Denmark.
Kjersti, we have earlier listed some of the achievements of NSFP during the first 38 years. Could you say something about what has been done in NordGen Forest during the later period?
Yes, I can. And I think I would repeat what has already been said. What is the core? What was the core and is still the core of this cooperation is actually the dialogue between people across the Nordic region, and even also the Baltic region has taken part in this. And not only, actually different part of the forest sector, managers, practitioners, and scientists have all taken part in this. So this broad participation is actually the main importance of the cooperation. Like you mentioned, since 2008 we are part of the NordGen, Nordic Genetic Resource Center in Alnarp, and this also of course embeds us even more in the family of genetic resources. We are now a secretariat situated in Ås. Inger Sundheim Fløystad, it's also Thomas Solvin, and it's myself. And I mentioned that we're now even more embedded in the genetic resources family. This is maybe one of the reasons why, or one of the projects which I will tell you about is that we achieved to have a deposit of forest seed in the Svalbard seed vault. In February 2015 we managed to, we invited ministers from Sweden, Norway and Denmark up to Svalbard, and some forest tree seeds were stored up there. And this is mainly, seed storage is mainly as a reference to reference material to the forest that is evolving in the Nordic forests. So this material up in the ice will be a reference material for that, to see how climate change affects our genetic resources. And apart from that, you mentioned already this project about legal rights, which has been an important project on the access to genetic resources, forest genetic resources. We have worked on that. And also we have had some cooperation in breeding in Norway spruce mainly. This is also partly related to what Mats Berlin told us earlier. And a third project which I could mention is a project on ash decline, the ash dieback disease, which is severely affecting our ash forests. We had a project on this, and there's still projects ongoing in the Nordic region on ash dieback disease.
Kjersti, in earlier years we had scholarships in NSFP. Have you continued this?
Yes, we have. from the start, I think they were mainly given to nursery people. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So now we have expanded a bit. We have, well, first of all, a very good cooperation with the SNS, the Nordic Forest Research, and so we have doubled the output from the grant, and we give scholarships to, well, around 10 people every year, and it's some people from the practical forestry, but also master students and PhD. I would also want to tell a little bit more about the thematic days and conferences. It's now a very important part of what we are doing. So we are having conferences and thematic days 3 times a year, actually, 2 thematic days and 1 conference. And what we have done last years is to try to focus on participation of young people, which we think is very important. And the topics of these thematic days and conferences, it's a very broad spectrum. It's about plant and seed and breeding, also about exotic species, about plant health. I must say last year's climate change and plant health issues has become more important, of course. And I would just want to show you the last few years which kind of thematic days and conferences we've had. The very last one was a webinar, of course, that was in the COVID-19 already. On the 1st of April we were supposed to be in Uppsala, but we had it as a webinar instead. So we've been to Iceland, we've been to Finland, and we've been to Norway. And some of the thematic days are normally in the national, local language, whereas the conferences are in English and have a broader topic. Some of these conferences are in a very nice scenery, of course. This one is from Iceland in Akureyri in 2018. And this one in Riga, Latvia in 2015, I would especially point at, because this is a very nice cooperation, Nordic-Baltic cooperation, having this conference on the wise use of forest reproductive material. Throughout the cooperation we've had these kind of meetings. I think maybe it was you who told me, Tore, that still there are stories told from these early meetings for the nursery sector, which was quite important for cooperation and knowledge exchange already in the 70s and the 80s.
Yes, in the 70s and 80s, these meetings for the nursery staff people, they were very important and were considered to be successes in many, many years.
Thank you, Kjersti. Now we will have a closer look at the future of the forest. We are happy to welcome a thematic presentation from Iceland. Edda Oddsdottir, Research Director at the Icelandic Forest Service, will talk about the effects of climate change on Iceland.
What we can see is that, and what we know is that climate change presents a completely new challenge to forest management decision. Since the species and the silviculture that we are using today, they must be viable both under present conditions but also under continuously evolving climatic conditions throughout the rotation. This means that the species and clones that we are planting today, they must survive today and also in the climate that will be after 50 years. It is therefore not just a problem of adapting to a new climate, but also coping with the change itself. Here in Iceland, we depend to a large extent on introduced tree species. with the native birds being 1/3 of planted species, and then introduced species like sitka and pine and black cottonwood are the main species for the 2/3. And what you can see here in the back is also one species that I forgot to mention is Larix siberica. It's in East Iceland and was planted some 25 years ago. The cultivar is from Tuva, which is located inland in Siberia and was doing very well in the beginning. But now it has been declining for the last years due to climate change. And we can see that this cultivar is not something that we can use in the future. In the front, we have an oak that was planted in 2017 here in Iceland, and it originated from Germany, and they're actually doing quite well. And that is something that no one would have expected a few years ago. We have both positive and negative impacts, or expect both positive and negative impacts of climate change on forestry. We can use new tree species that may give us more production or be more productive. We expect increasing length of the growing season and higher productivity due to higher CO2. But also, we are seeing death of trees and forests that due to climate change that don't tolerate the climate as it is now. We have increased risk of disturbance, and what we have also been looking at is changes in insect and pest outbreaks. Looking at the climatic limit for Betula pubescens, which is the only native tree that forms forests in Iceland. We can see that currently the limit is between the Arctic and temperate vegetation, and it is about 400 to 500 meters above sea level, which is just below the plateau, which is the Iceland's middle. It lies in 500 to 700 meters above sea level. If we and you can see the current limit here of the Betula. If we increase the temperature just 1 degree, then we expect the limit for the Betula to increase dramatically. So we can see Betula covering the whole plateau in few years. We can see similar changes in with other tree species like the Sitka spruce, which is not native; it's introduced species. Today we have the potential area of 4 million hectares, or around 40% of the total land area. You can see that here, and we have we have 8 to 10 mean annual increment is the most common one. But if we have plus 4 degrees, we can see how that changes. We would have potential area almost all over Iceland, and the yield would increase also dramatically. Climate change are also likely to affect insect herbivores, and by altering various processes. Could be survival rate, reproductive rates, or distribution of pests. And in Iceland, we have shown a strong link between the number of new pests and mean annual temperature. And with easier pathways and better climate, we are expecting higher numbers of pests. And you can see here in how this was how we have the number of pests here is the gray area, and then how it has increased during the last years. One of the species that we have been using and is the black cottonwood. We found the rust on black cottonwood in 1999, in South Iceland. And it has been shown that it has a significant effect on tree growth, and it is more frequent in warm, moist summers, so climate change definitely affects it. It was soon obvious that some of the aspen clones we were using showed better resistance to the rust than others. So in 2002, we started clonal experiments and that are located all over Iceland. And then we have collected 350 clones in one collection in South Iceland, where 40 of those have good rust resistance, and moreover, they are also fast growing. This is an example of a very successful story, we think, and we are already now started to produce some of these fast-growing rust-resistant clones. And we are have a collaboration with Greenland and Faroe Islands, where we will also test some of the clones in those islands. So, what can we expect? Well, it's complicated. If we have been wise enough or lucky enough and planted the right species at the right time, we may expect faster growth of trees. However, the danger of new or old pests and increased effects of pests and diseases can also be expected. How severe those effects will be is variable. It will vary, and both between and within the tree species. And then also the one effect more, which is natural enemies on pests and diseases that we don't know actually how they will behave. But there is a real danger here in Iceland when a new pest arrives that it may not have the natural enemies needed to keep it down. And therefore the effects of the pest in new location may be more severe than in the old one. But it is clear that continuous work on clonal and species adaptation is vital for forestry in Iceland, both for natural forestry restoration and also for what we would call like timber forestry or carbon forestry. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Edda, for this insights in the future aspects of forests and climate. First of all, in Iceland, but I think it's fair to say that the different species and different somewhat different realities in the different Nordic countries. But I think it's fair to say that the challenges and also the opportunities are somewhat the same. Yeah, isn't that true?
Yeah, I would think so. I think in all the Nordic countries we will see changes in the adoption of the clones and cultivars and species we are using now. It's more evident here in Iceland since we have the forest cover is very low. So it's more. I think it's more evident here, but I think this will be also important for the other Nordic countries.
Yeah. And a last question, how would you rate the knowledge exchange across Nordic countries in this context?
It's absolutely vital. In many ways, we are lucky enough to have forestry at different levels in the Nordic countries. So, for example, here in Iceland, we can learn a lot from what has been done and has not been done in the Nordic countries, and it's vital to keep up that network of knowledge, especially, like I say, with the clonal and species adaptation. I think it's very important.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you
for your contribution
and congratulations.
Thank you.
Looking forward for the next 50 years and then the 50 years after that.
Yes, indeed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Greetings, NordGen. International and Nordic cooperation is very important for Icelandic forestry.
The roots of afforestation in Iceland are based on Nordic cooperation. The land was mostly treeless 100 years ago, and 50 years ago we were taking our first steps in growing forests for timber with exotic trees. The cooperation with NordGen has been very valuable for Iceland. The cooperation and connections we have got through various research projects have opened doors for students to study forestry, both forest engineers, master thesis or doctoral studies in the Scandinavian countries. We have got seeds from seeds orchards in the Nordic countries to test new provenances of plant material. Large part of the forest that we are now beginning to harvest here in Iceland and get wood from came from such cooperation. We look forward to work with NordGen in the next 50 years. Thank you and goodbye. Takk og farvel. Kitos hei. Takk og adieu. Happy anniversary, NordGen.
Welcome to this day of